Now, all good things must come to an end, and the Ming Dynasty is no exception, right? So we've been talking about the mandate of heaven, how you could have new dynasties rise up. So we're going to look at here in this section on the decline of the Ming, the rise of the Qing, and the importance of stability. So here's what's going to happen. China's a gigantic country, right? China's a gigantic country. So you can assume that somewhere in China, there's going to be a problem. There's going to be a natural disaster like an earthquake or a forest fire, or more seriously in China, flooding. There's always going to be some place where there's not enough food. There's going to be a drought somewhere. There's going to be famine somewhere. That's just a given. And I want to stress, people did not blame the emperor when these things happened because it was just accepted that they always happened. However, the emperor and the government he headed had the duty of taking care of people when these kinds of things happened to them. So, for example, if there was an area where there was a flood, the emperor should drop taxes for the year so people can recover, like they won't have to pay their taxes, and they should bring in food so the people won't starve to death. So what's key is the government was expected by the people of China to take care of them. Wasn't expected to prevent natural disasters. It was expected to take care of people suffering from them and suffering from droughts and things like that. The problem is, and this happens pretty much with every dynasty, but into the later 1500s and the 1600s, the Ming were having increasing economic problems and particularly corruption. And that prevented the government from dealing with these problems. So what I mean by this is, okay, there's flooding, but the government is not able to bring in enough food to help the people who are starving. Or maybe the government officials who are supposed to bring the food just keep it for themselves, or they make the people pay for it, or they sell it, or something. Or maybe the government is not able to keep up the dams and dikes that prevent the floods. So these things get worse, right? Everyone expects that there'll be natural disasters and food shortages, but into the 1500s and early 1600s, economic problems and corruption are preventing the government from dealing with these effectively. Now remember, Chinese people are very practical. If they ask themselves three questions, in a sense, to know if their emperor has a mandate of heaven. Do I have enough food to eat? Do I have a place to live? Do I have clothes to wear? And increasingly, Chinese people were saying no to all three of these questions. No, I don't have enough food to eat. No, I don't have a good place to live. No, I don't have clothes to wear. And so in response, there's a rise of banditry, right? People will become thieves. They'll start robbing people because they're starving. And eventually what happens is that the government can't deal with those bandits. They'll move from just being robbers to rebels. They'll move from just being people who are going out stealing to people who want to overthrow the government and are calling for a change in dynasty. So there's an idea here that the mandate of heaven is changing. Heaven is changing who's in charge. Right? More and more Chinese people are saying that Ming are doing a bad job. They're not taking care of us. It's time for a change. And in fact, a group of rebels will overthrow the Ming dynasty. And usually that would lead to the establishment of a new Chinese dynasty. But that's not quite what's going to happen here. So there are rebels who successfully overthrow the Ming. But at the same time this is all going on, there's foreign invasions happening. Right? If you look to the Great Wall, you can see Mongols are invading and the Jurchens/Manchus are invading. Remember earlier we talked about how the Ming, one reason they stopped having those expeditions, Zheng He's expeditions, was because of the threat from the north. We can see why they were concerned, because the north was a threat. And in fact, what's going to happen is, even though the Ming will be overthrown by other Chinese people, the Manchus will successfully invade China and overthrow them. So what's going to happen is China will be conquered by these Manchu people who will establish the Qing dynasty. And it's really important to keep these things straight. The Manchu are the ethnic group, right? The Manchu are the ethnic group. The Qing is the dynasty. And it goes Ming, Qing. It's an alphabetical order. Ming dynasty first, then the Qing dynasty. The Ming are what we would call Han Chinese. That's like 95% of Chinese people, if you ask them, what's your ethnic group, they'll say Han Chinese. I know it's confusing because in the United States, we think of Chinese people just being Chinese, but there's actually different kinds of Chinese people. It's kind of like saying, I'm European, almost, right? There's different kinds of Europeans. There's different kinds of Chinese. 95% or so are Han. The Ming were Han. The Qing rulers, the Qing ruling dynasty, the ruling family, are Manchu. And just to make it clear, look on the map. You can see they're coming from across the northeast, across the Great Wall. The people who made this map, I don't know why they show them invading through the ocean. They didn't. They went across land. But in any case. So here's the thing. China was a multi-ethnic empire, and is a multi-ethnic state dominated by Han Chinese. There's lots of different ethnic groups in China. I think there's officially today 55 different ethnic groups. But China is not a homogenous country. It is a multi-ethnic empire dominated by Han Chinese. Traditionally, the emperors were Han. The emperors who ruled before the Ming, they were actually Mongol. But for the most part, the emperors are Han. Like I say, the Qing, who are not Han, they're Manchu, different ethnic group, different language, different customs, different religion, different culture. They conquer the Chinese in 1644. Right? The Ming were overthrown by Chinese rebels, but the Qing come in and defeat those rebels, and they take over China. And I want to stress again, the Manchus are not Han Chinese. They are a different ethnic group. They come from north of the border, so they're seen by the Chinese as barbarians. They do not accept Confucian culture. They do not speak Chinese. They do not write in Chinese. They have a different kind of religion than the Chinese. They are not Han Chinese. They are a different group. And many Han Chinese ask themselves, how could barbarians receive the mandate of heaven? How could these people who don't follow Confucianism, who don't speak Chinese, who don't act in a civilized manner, how could they ever receive the mandate of heaven? Clearly, we need to work to restore the Ming. So when the Manchu conquered China and established the Qing dynasty, many Chinese people rejected them. They said they're barbarians. And they wanted to be loyal to the Ming and actually would launch rebellions trying to restore the Ming to power. So the Qing have a real problem. How do they convince the Chinese that they have the mandate of heaven and that they should rule? And you can see how they answered this question, and they dealt with it successfully. Notice, and this is why I give years, the Qing dynasty lasted a long time, 1644, 1912. So they solved this problem. And you can see it in the Kangxi Emperor, this man pictured here on the right. The Kangxi Emperor understood this problem, and he decided that to solve this issue, he would accept Confucianism. He would accept Chinese civilization. So, for example, he went to a temple dedicated to Confucius in Chufu, the place where Confucius is from, and bowed 9 times to Confucius to show that he respected Confucius. And you can see in this image, he's not dressed as we would think an emperor would be dressed. Like you think of an emperor as someone who wears fancy clothes and like gold and silver and jewelry. He's dressed in a very plain way. He's dressed as a Confucian scholar. So he's trying to show, I respect Confucianism, I follow Confucian values. And a lot of times you think of an emperor as someone like with a sword or something like that. He's pictured with a book on his lap. And they're a little bit different from maybe what you might expect, but that furniture in the back are Chinese-style bookcases. So you have this idea here that the Kangxi Emperor, who purposely commissioned this painting to make him look like a Confucian, is accepting Confucianism. He's accepting Chinese civilization. And you know what? This convinced the Chinese. And they largely accepted Manchu rule. They said, okay, yeah, it's true that the heaven would never give the mandate to barbarians, but clearly the Qing are not barbarians. They've accepted civilization. So we can accept their rule. And this allows them to last for a very long time, up to 1912. So notice, the Chinese are willing to be ruled by non-Chinese people if they accept Chinese civilization. It doesn't quite work that way now, though, by the way, it's complex. Manchu today are considered Chinese. They weren't considered Chinese in this time period. What this means then is that because China is now stable, the Qing can go out and conquer more of China. More territory. And you can see that in this map. And that's one thing I should note, right? When you look at the map of the Ming, and that's this kind of cross-hatching, the pink bit in the center, it's much smaller than China is today. The current territory of China is based on these Qing conquests. In any case, the Qing are successful at convincing the Chinese that they had the mandate of heaven. This allows them then to go out and expand their territory. And the stability brought by the Qing and the crops from the Americas leads to the population of China to expand. right? In the year 1390, it had about 70 to 80 million. By late 1700, it had about 300 million. This led to increasing trade, urbanization and culture, and increased wealth. So my point here, I want to stress, stability is good because it helps people to be able to be left alone to do their jobs, to farm, to manufacture things, to be a merchant, whatever. And that allows for all these great things: growth in culture, growth in trade, growth in population, all these wonderful things. So this is why they tend to focus on stability. When you can keep the country stable and people are free to work, things generally get better. They're not interested in development or innovation. Those things could threaten stability because they bring change. Change always threatens stability. So we can see why the Chinese would tend to emphasize stability over innovation. It made sense. It will also prevent them from catching up with the West, at least until later on in their history in the early 20th century, which is something we'll talk about in the future.